All right, welcome back to the Copywriters Podcast with your host, the world's greatest copywriting coach, David Garfinkel. David, how are you doing today?
Nathan, I'm good. How are you?
I am fantastic, and I'm excited about today's. You gave me a tiny sneak preview of what we were going to be talking about with our guest today, and I can't wait. So I'm going to shut my mouth and hand it over to you.
All right, well, let's get rolling. Today we've got an urgent topic that everyone in copywriting has questions about, and we've got an expert to give us much needed guidance. The topic is content. What do you do with it? When does it replace copy? When is it inappropriate? And when does content blend with copy and actually enhance the selling power? Our expert is Scott Aughtmon, founder of Direct Response Content Marketing. Full disclosure, Scott and I have been friends for a while, and he invited me to speak at a marketing class he was teaching at UC Berkeley 6 years ago. Seems like a lifetime. Scott's the author of the book 51 Content Marketing Hacks and has created an infographic called 21 Types of Content We Crave. That infographic has gone viral, and we're going to talk about a few of the types today and give you a link to the full list at the end. But I would be remiss if I didn't first tell you this. Copy is powerful. You're responsible for how you use what you hear in this podcast, and most of the time, common sense is all you need. But if you make extreme claims or if you're writing copy for offers in highly regulated industries like health, finance, business opportunity, you may want to get a legal review after you write and before you start using the copy. My larger clients do this all the time. Scott, welcome, and thanks so much for being here.
Hey, David. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, let's jump right in. How did you get into content marketing in the first place?
It's kind of funny. I got into content marketing the same way that I got into marketing, which was really by accident. I created this website focused on this small music niche in the late 90s. And I quickly realized that I needed to figure out a way to get people to actually see the website, to come to the website. And that led me to realize, hey, that marketing stuff, I had to figure out what that is. At this point, I never focused on marketing. I didn't care about marketing. But it's the late 90s. I start searching, and guess who I come across? I come across all these internet gurus that were around in the late 90s. I began studying them. I start learning it. It's very interesting to me. I never thought it would be. And at the same time, for this site, I began creating content. I start interviewing musicians. I create how-to articles. I have concert listings, an email newsletter. I even have user-generated content. And so with that combined experience and knowledge of marketing and this content, I start putting this out there. And long story short, that website becomes fairly well known in that little niche. And that's sort of how I got my feet wet and sort of jumped into marketing. And then about 3 years later, the recession was hitting, the previous one of 2002. And I'm starting to realize, you know what, a lot of the marketing that I've studied, a lot of the experts I've studied, I think they know ways to survive and prosper in a recession that most business owners don't. So I decide, okay, I'm gonna create a book called How Your Business Can Survive and Prosper in a Recession. I'm gonna interview top business, sales, marketing experts and get them to reveal their secrets or what they know about how to survive and prosper in a recession. And spoiler, you were one of those experts. And I put together the book, I compiled it, and I put up a website called recessionsolution.com. And I start to create content and write content for that website. I released the book. And up to this point, I don't realize it, but I've been using content marketing the whole time. It wasn't until 2009 or 2010 where I start to hear this phrase, content marketing. And I'm like, what's content marketing? As the more I research it, the more I realize what it is. I suddenly realized I've been using content marketing for 10 years up to this point. When I first created that website, I was using marketing, but I was also using content. I was attracting people with the information, the education that was a part of that site, and even more, that book, how your business can survive and prosper in a recession. I realized that book that I was selling was really content marketing for me. What it sold was me, right? It positioned me, because I wrote an intro and conclusion as an expert. I'd been doing marketing for 3 years, and it wasn't like I was suddenly well known, but it positioned me. It allowed me to do radio interviews and to start to become at least a little known in that arena. And I realized, I've been using content marketing the whole time. So I pivot on recessionsolution.com. I stop just writing about business and marketing and recession, and I start to write about content marketing. And I also begin writing for top websites like Content Marketing Institute. And I begin, and that sort of opens the door into the content marketing world, because that site really is the site that made content marketing popular, really popularized the term. And that's sort of how I ended up in the content marketing arena. So
that's great. And I guess around 2012, you created an infographic, which is spot on relevant and accurate today. How did that come about?
So it was 2012, and one night I get this sort of epiphany. I start to think about content in general, and I start to realize that the content that people love seems to have common themes. I start to think about, it doesn't matter if it's on TV, if it's in movies, if it's in a book, if it's in a nonfiction blog post. There is certain content that seems to attract people. People want more and more of it, right? They crave it. Yeah. And so I decide, okay, I'm going to see if I can come up with a list of the content people crave. And I start to think about content that I've used when I've, written content that I've used when I've spoke different places. And by the time I'm done, I come up with, my list is 21 types of content we crave. And I look at the list and I'm like, I think this could be really helpful for people. And so I decided to take it one step further. I decide at this point, infographics are starting to become a new thing or a popular thing. And I decide, okay, I'm going to get an infographic made. And then I reach out to Content Marketing Institute, who I'd been writing for on and off. And so I showed it to them. I sent it to them and I said, hey, would you like to use this? And they said, yeah, if you could write an intro to it, we would love to use it. So I was like, okay, do it now. I'm like, I think it's important. I think this list can really be helpful, but I'm not sure what's the public, going to decide about this list. And so it was June 5th, 2012, the post went live, and I was about to learn what the public thought of this list. Almost immediately, people started commenting on the post, very positive comments. They started sharing the post. It's getting tweeted everywhere, and it's Facebook and all over. And they keep commenting and keep commenting. They keep sharing and keep sharing. By the time I gave up counting, it had been shared about 800 times. And the comments on the website, it had 100 comments before they finally shut the comments down. And the funny thing was, later I ended up getting a testimonial from Joe Polizzi, who is the founder of Content Marketing Institute. And he ended up telling me later on that post was one of the most popular posts of the year. And so for me, I was like shocked. I was like, there really is a certain type of content that resonates with all people and that people crave. And I later went on to do, I put together this training and this talk for B2B content marketers in Silicon Valley. It was in San Mateo. And I was able to speak to them. I was able to not just talk to them about what the types are, like we're going to talk about today, but I was able to talk to them about how do you use these in your content in order to grab people's attention and pull them through and inspire them to action. So that's kind of the whole story behind how this list came to be.
Well, that's interesting. I remember maybe 10 years ago, about the time you came out with your graphic, there was sort of this divide among the hardcore direct marketers where there was copy, which would sell, and there was content, which was like fluff or something.
Right.
Obviously, maybe that was right then. It's certainly not true today. You even mentioned that Dan Kennedy, the emails that go out under his name these days, are a masterful swirl of content and pitch. Could you just say a little bit about how the two categories are interrelated, not different, have merged, are the same thing, whatever?
Yeah, thankfully Dan doesn't use very much technology, so he'll never hear me say this. But I would say that Dan Kennedy is an amazing content marketer. From somebody that's a copywriter in direct response, that could be insulting. But I thought about it, like I'm a paid magnetic marketing subscriber, right? I get the newsletter, right? So this is paid content. In that content, Dan will regularly promote his other, programs, events, et cetera, right? And he does it in two ways. Sometimes it is direct and obvious, hey, I've got this program, you should use it, here's why. But what I've noticed is to his paid customers, and I'll get to prospects in a second, to paid customers, he is constantly, indirectly and subtly promoting those other products, those events through the content in that newsletter. He's very strategic. None of it's an accident. It's through the stories, the case studies. Dan is harnessing the power of content to sell his other programs. Now, if you go to the prospect side, what you and I talked about is, I'm on his email list, and on his email list, Dan is providing, and this is like I'm on the email list for like prospects, right? So he's constantly providing amazing content, like content that I want to open every one of Dan's emails because I know it's going to teach me something. But within that content, he is always selling, right? He's trying to show me the problem that I have. He's trying to get me to feel the problem. He's trying to get me to see why the other solutions aren't good, why they don't work, and why his is the better and the best one. And he is constantly providing, even within his sales type of copy, powerful content. So what I really think is, I think the best marketers have learned to take content and copy and merge them together and weave them together. And I think we talked about this too. I think it's not a new. I think it's always been. Some of the greatest sales letters, the most successful sales letters, right, were story based, right? The famous Wall Street Journal one, the tale of two men, right? Like, or I sat down at. They laughed when I sat down at the piano, but when I began to play, right? They're story based. They're content. And I used to read a lot of these gurus. I'd read their sales letters because they were full of content. I would learn stuff even if I couldn't buy the actual product because it had so much content in there. It wasn't just one or the other. It was both.
That's great. Well, I know you've got 21 types of content, and there's just not enough time to cover all of them on this podcast, but let's go through a few of them, shall we? Maybe you could discuss each one. So what's your first one that we would discuss today?
So we talked about one of the types of content that people crave is content that reminds us that there's more. And the reason that type of content resonates with people is because it's so easy for us, no matter at what level we're at, to get into a rut, right? We get stuck and we begin to settle, right? Either consciously or unconsciously, we settle for where we're at. And we all want someone to remind us to get off our rear and get moving, right? Like we want to hear those kind of things that remind us there's more than what you currently have, right? Like that's the kind of story that people are attracted to. And I think the powerful thing is when we create content like that, it doesn't just encourage us to try for more, to go for more, but it actually creates an affinity with whoever that person is that's telling us that, right? There's a connection. We want to hear more from that type of person that gives us type of content. So,
Okay, do you have a quick example of that, or something you've done, seen?
just in a general sense, when we can show, case studies or tell stories of a, person that was at an average person that was at this level, that reached, this incredible level. Like those are the kind of stories, that I feed myself. This everyday person became this superstar in this arena. They succeeded in this way. I think those stories, they're almost, in a sense, the hero's journey, right? Where some everyday person takes steps that unlocks potential and results that they wouldn't believe and nobody else would believe. So that's the kind of the content that you want to kind of tap into.
Okay, that makes it a lot clearer. Thanks. So, what's the second kind?
The next type of content is the content that inspires us to take action. And the interesting thing is that it doesn't just fit in copy or content or trying to sell people something. Most of us in life know what we should do, but we do not do it, right? There's the classic example of a guy who has a heart attack and survives, and suddenly, because he had the heart attack, he changes his complete eating habits. He begins to exercise, right? Like it's that pain, that reality of that I better change everything or I'm going to be in trouble, like that causes us to take action. And we need, that type of content, the type of content that reminds us of, the pain that we're in, in the classic, copywriting sense, right? You're trying to amplify the pain, not to manipulate, but to motivate somebody to realize this is worse than you realize. You become the frog in the boiling water, and you don't realize that this is bad and it's going to get worse. And we need that type of content, that also, so the frustration, the pain inspires us to action, or the inspiration, right? The motivation, what we can gain, right? We need that type of content that helps us to realize that if we would just move forward, we might be able to see and experience goals that we have put on the back burner because we thought they weren't possible.
Yeah, I want to say something about the title of your infographic because I just connected a couple dots. You're saying this is the type of content we crave, and we do. We're all waiting for someone to say, "Hey, get off the fence and do something." But the word crave reminds me of something else, and I'm not sure if it was Joseph Campbell or one of his acolytes who said, "We crave story. We crave story." It's the same kind of thing, whether it's a story or not, whether it's a hero's journey or not. We're not totally self-contained and finished. We want input. We crave this kind of stuff, which gets us to the third one, which I think is profound. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, there's the third one we're going to talk about today is content that reminds us that we matter, right? Like, all of us, deep down inside of us, whether we admit it or not, we want to know that we matter. We want to know that we're important, that what we say and what we do makes a difference. We want to know that we're important, to other people. And that's the type of content, again, that people crave, because we often think, is what I'm doing even, does it make a difference that I'm even alive, that I'm here, right? Like those are the type of questions that people are asking consciously or subconsciously. And that's the kind of content that people crave. I'll use it for an example of the type of content. This is old school, classic example. But it was Christmas, every Christmas, an old school movie that people love to watch is It's a Wonderful Life, right? The whole story is all about a guy that thinks his life does not matter. And the whole story is about, if you weren't here, this wouldn't have happened, this wouldn't have happened, and this wouldn't have happened, and nothing that you know of would have existed, right? Like those are the kind of stories, like the reason that story is popular and people watch it over and over, even though it's black and white and old school and not new, is because of that message that people crave, that I matter, I make a difference.
Yeah, that's great. And it's so true. When we were talking about this ahead of the podcast, I mentioned that I noticed that so much stuff on Netflix and Prime Video and network TV these days is people seeking validation for their own identity, trying to find out who they are. It's like a really big theme across a lot of um, content on TV these days, and
Yep.
I think that goes directly to your point, content that reminds us that matters. And speaking of entertainment, I think you came out with this next one before the word edutainment sort of became popular in the blogosphere, the social media memosphere, whatever you want to call it. What's your next one?
Yeah, the next type of content that people crave is content that educates while entertaining. And I think that as content marketers, copywriters, we unintentionally get so focused on trying to educate or influence, we forget to actually make sure that it's enjoyable to consume the content or copy that we've created. And you're talking about, Hollywood. If you think about it, people will watch 9 hours straight of Stranger Things, right? So, we say, oh, people don't have attention spans, that you can't keep their attention. Really? They'll watch 9 hours straight, maybe a bathroom break and grab a snack is it. They'll watch 9 hours straight. Why? Because it's interesting, it's entertaining, there's cliffhangers, they have to know what's going to happen next, right? But the same people will have a very difficult time spending 9 minutes trying to consume the copy and the content that we create. The reason is because we forgot to make sure that it's interesting, that it's entertaining, that it's enjoyable, And I think we really ought to take, the lesson from Hollywood. Like, Hollywood is not just trying to entertain us. They're trying to educate us. They're trying to influence. They're trying to change our minds. A lot of times they're trying to sell us something, right? Maybe it's physical or an idea. And obviously, Hollywood uses, straight, maybe, content, maybe like training, teaching, education, right? But Hollywood really influences us by the stories that they create, right? They know by default, we want to change someone's opinion. Don't just tell them what you want them to believe. Show them, pull them into a story, let them relate and engage with that person in that story, so that they feel what they feel, they see what they see, and that they're drawn through the whole experience. And so I think we need to figure out how to make sure that the content that we create is entertaining at the same time as accomplishing all the other things we're trying to get it to accomplish.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in real quick and say that a common complaint that I hear over and over in modern culture is entertainers make more money than educators do. And I always think to myself, yeah, so take advantage of that.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Absolutely. All right. And then the fifth one is curious to me. These all are, but this one's especially curious. The fifth one we're talking about today, of course. Could you go over that?
The fifth one on our list, and again, the numbers are different on the list, but the fifth one for today is content that creates a fresh point of view about common things. So content that creates a fresh point of view about common things. I think that most people, when they're creating content or copy, they're focused on the what, on what I'm trying to share, right? The information, the facts. And they unintentionally neglect the how. Like, how am I going to present this? And, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like, if you want your ideas, if you want your information to stand out from all the rest that's out there, then what you need to do is focus. Obviously, you need to know what you're going to talk about, right? You need to know the information, right? But you need to think about how will I present that information, because it enables you to take a common idea and make it seem completely new if you focus on how you're going to present that. Some examples, just what I mean by how. So the personality that you decide to communicate the information, again, back to Dan Kennedy, he's the grumpy, cranky, kind of guru guy, right? Like, that's the personality that all of his content is underneath that umbrella, right? And how you present the content is back to what we're talking about. It's the stories that you use, right? How you communicate is the examples that you use. How you communicate is the structure. Like, how are you going to put this thing together and weave it so that somebody flows from this thought to this thought to this thought? I would say attitude, which in some sense it could be the same as personality, but I see it a little bit differently than that. And then the last thing is the perspective that you bring. So all those types of things can enable you to take common, content, common thoughts, common ideas, and wrap it in these things. And so that the how changes the whole thing. And so it seems like a brand new idea when it's an everyday common idea that maybe someone's heard 100 times, but you suddenly snap them out of their dream state and made them see it in a new way, and it feels new and it inspires them like it's the first time they've ever heard it before.
That's great. Well, we got to wrap up soon, but would you like to just review the 5 of the 21 types that you talked about here, and then maybe we can talk about your infographic and anything else you'd like to talk about?
Sure. So we've got the 5 types we talked about today are the content that reminds us there's more, content that inspires us to action, content that reminds us that we matter, content that educates while entertaining us, and content that creates a fresh point of view even about the common things.
That's great. And we put in a link for your infographic in the show notes. And then also, you have a training on content. Do you want to, and you even have a special offer for listeners of the podcast. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll just add this extra thought too, just before I do that, David. We've been focusing on stories, but I do want to emphasize that these types of content, by default, I use stories because they're powerful, right? Because they capture attention, right? The most powerful words in the English language are "once upon a time." They create context, right? Like I was just talking about, and they're memorable. So by default, I use these types of content with stories, but these types of content can be presented through quotes and through stats. So, and you should be creative again in how you weave these types of content. By default, stories are powerful, but don't forget to use quotes from people that are respected in the arena that you're trying to speak to, and statistics, that sort of provide that sort of logical side that people need. So I did put together a training. That was the training that I ended up doing for those B2B marketers in Silicon Valley. I ended up recording it along with 10 additional types of content that Content Marketing Institute asked me to create for a follow-up post about 4 years after that one. And the training is called 31 Types of Content We Crave. And it really shows you the reason why we need to use content that people crave, what we're up against. It shows some examples of how to use it. I go a little bit more in depth on some of these types of content to help people to understand what they are. And then I really use some examples from some popular people, authors, speakers that use the method that I'm teaching. They didn't learn it from me, but they're examples that they use the method that I use about taking content we crave, and they've created powerful content books They've become experts in their arena. And then I break it down and just show like an example of how I can take a common idea and how I can make it seem new and powerful. And I normally charge $99 for it. For your listeners, I would love to give them the opportunity to have it for $79. And along with that, I'd like to give them a free PDF copy of my book, 51 Content Marketing Hacks.
That's awesome. And we've got the link in, and it's good through the end of March. Is that right?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to jump in real quick and just say that I love this episode, and I would definitely recommend taking Scott up on this offer right now. Content and micro content is the most engaging type of stuff that we're putting out. And if you can take your content and you can apply some of the direct response stuff that you learn here on the podcast, it's the perfect combination for where people are at in their consumption mode in the current year. So thank you so much, Scott, for coming on and sharing this with us. And one more time before we're out of here, where can people go to check out more of your stuff?
They can go to my website, directresponsecontentmarketing.com is really where I talk about how I've merged together the two things, content and copy, directresponsecontentmarketing.com.
Man, so much powerful information in this episode. Some great content. So thank you for coming on and helping us make it.
Thanks.
All right. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you check out all the other episodes that we have for you over at copywriterspodcast.com. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe. And until next time, we will catch you later.
Catch you later.